Okay, chapter 12, the Reformation. And before I jump in and give you a framework of the major events of chapter 12 in covering the events of the Reformation, let me ask you, do you have access to a Bible in your own language that you may legally possess and legally read? Do you have the right to choose and to publicly express your own religious views without significant worry of persecution? Do you belong to a congregation where you can choose your church leadership? Does your congregation vote on a deacon or an elder or a pastor? Do you have the right to go to the church of your choosing? Do you, at the age of 18, when many of you will be finishing high school or starting college or starting into a trade, do you have the right to vote for your political leadership? Remember, it used to be the criteria was you had to be one of a small group of electors to have a voice in choosing the Holy Roman Emperor. All you have to do in America is turn 18, and you have a voice in choosing the president of the most powerful country on the planet. That is a huge privilege and a huge responsibility. Now, I mention that because all of these things are outgrowths of that era of the Reformation interwoven with the Renaissance. And so if we go back in time and unplug the Reformation, then a good bit of religious freedom is going to be taken away with that. Now, when we say Reformation, that seems to imply reform, and there was need for reform in the church at that time. All churches have this in common. There are people in them, and therefore churches are liable to scandal, churches are liable to corruption, and somebody has to be willing to stand up and say, this is wrong, this is the way we should be going. And so what was wrong with the church at the time? Well, remember from our last chapter who Pope Leo X is. Pope Leo X is a member of the Medici family. And he was, of course, formerly a cardinal, because you have to be a cardinal before you can become pope. And how did he rise to the rank of cardinal? His father bought the office for him. He simply paid for it. And is it possible or even likely that Giovanni de' Medici actually purchased the office of pope? Possibly. I'm not enough of a historian to tell you, but I wouldn't be surprised. However, other church offices were up for sale, and so men with means and money, rather than men with knowledge of Scripture and concern for human souls, began to take over the leadership of the church. Now, there are always, as we go into times and events like this, there are always faithful Christians inside the church, but the leadership was in poor condition, and along with that was a great rise in the superstitious veneration of relics. Here is a nail from the original cross, one of actually several thousand, and looking at this nail can get you days off from purgatory. Here's a splinter of wood from the original cross. Here's a vial containing the tears of the Virgin Mary. Here's a shred of the diaper of the baby Jesus. And all of these things have this cumulative effect of getting you days off from purgatory if you look at them, and if you have paid for the privilege of looking at them. So what you have is superstition blended with a degree of corruption where ignorant people were being taken advantage of. It's very similar today to many of the TV evangelists that you see that make promises to pray for your prosperity, to pray for your health and your wealth and so on, if you send them a donation. And so this is as much a problem then as it is today, just in slightly different ways. And on top of that, and really the straw that breaks the camel's back in this instance is the sale of indulgences. An indulgence is a certificate. Yes, you get to purchase it. It's not given to you for free, and it's part of a fundraiser. It's to raise money for the building of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which Michelangelo will be the one painting the inside of. And so these indulgences promise you forgiveness of sin for a price, or perhaps forgiveness of sin for a relative currently suffering in purgatory. And so they were sometimes marketed that if your uncle, your grandmother, or somebody is suffering in purgatory, just buy the certificate for them and they're out. And so this is how the church was marketing, was fundraising. And the big issue here was sometimes people were buying these indulgences to get forgiven in advance. So you buy your indulgence on Friday afternoon and go party all Friday night, live as recklessly an immoral life as you want, and you're pre-forgiven. So, I mean, what's not to like about that, right? And so these were things that were discouraging repentance, discouraging real piety and reverence towards everything. It was bringing into question the reputation of the Roman Catholic Church. It was bringing into question the reputation of the Pope, and most importantly, it was bringing into question the validity of the Christian religion. And about this time, at the same time, there's an Augustinian monk who is absolutely struggling with his sin, feels deeply burdened by his sin and cannot find relief from it, and that's Martin Luther. And he at one time was asked, "Do you love God?" And he said, "Love God? Sometimes I hate him." And it was because he saw that God's standard was perfect, it was holy, it was righteous, and he knew he had no hope of ever living up to that. He even engaged in acts of self-torture to try to make himself feel forgiven of his sin. And finally, Luther read in the scriptures that the just shall live by faith. Well, faith in what? Faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ. And when he understood that critical element of the gospel, that's when he felt the burden of his sin fall away. And he finally felt relief and release from his sin. And so it is Luther having just made these discoveries. It was Luther having just found this spiritual freedom that is outraged at the sale of indulgences. Now, Luther takes his 95 points of debate, his famous 95 Theses, and nails them to the church door at Wittenberg. Nothing unusual about that. The church door was the community bulletin board. And so what he didn't know was the effect that document was going to have. A week earlier, he had done a similar thing over an issue that he was angry about and had posted a notice to the door of the church that he was ready to debate them, and absolutely nobody showed up. During the intervening week, he writes out 95 points of debate, calling into question the sale of indulgences, and without meaning to, he turns Western civilization inside out and has really no idea what he has started. But the 95 Theses are translated from Latin, in which he had originally written them into German. Because of the printing press, they're available in much of Germany in just 2 weeks' time. We don't know who translated them. Somebody did, and somebody got them out there. And suddenly, all of Germany, and as they get translated into more languages, much of Europe, is questioning this whole business of the sale of indulgences. And so, almost overnight, Martin Luther is catapulted into one of the most significant events in human history. And Luther meets significant opposition and eventually stands fast and begins his own movement. Now, after Luther comes along a French Christian man named John Calvin, and Calvin is an extremely well-informed church historian, a man with a phenomenal memory and a very gifted intellect. And Calvin takes what is called Reformed doctrine, the doctrine of this Reformation era, with a desire to go back to the simplicity of the gospel, back to the scriptures, hence sola scriptura, it is in the scriptures alone that we find the revelation of God. And so it is John Calvin that distills this doctrine in such a way that it is still what was done with Luther and what was done with Calvin, or done by them rather, is foundational to the doctrine of many churches currently in existence today. Now, this Reformation doctrine finds its way to different places in Europe, sometimes with success, sometimes without. It causes a split, and sometimes a very violent one, between Protestants and Catholics, who will sometimes go to war with each other over their religious beliefs. And where the Reformation really catches on in a way that's very significant to you and to me is in England. And the characters that we're most interested in the English Reformation would perhaps be King Henry VIII, and it is he who makes a break with the Roman Catholic Church for all the wrong reasons. He wanted to break away from the Roman Catholic Church because he wanted to divorce his wife, who was not able to produce a male heir, also showing a little ignorance on the issue of biology. But and the Pope told him that he would not honor that divorce. The Pope was right on that one. Henry was in the wrong, but Henry does break with the Roman Catholic Church in any case, and he forms the Anglican Church. And even though he did this for all the wrong reasons, for the first time, English Bibles are available in England. Now, this is going to go back and forth as we go through a number of different monarchs, and we're going to find one who attempts to forcibly reimpose Catholicism with Mary Tudor, and then not to be confused with Mary Queen of Scots. Those are two different Marys. And then we eventually make our way, and I'm skipping over a lot of history here that we'll get to in detail later, but we eventually get to King James. He is James the First of England, James the Sixth of Scotland, and he is the James after whom the King James Version of the Bible is named. He's important because he is a sort of Protestant king, and it is during his reign that the colonization of North America by English colonists begins. And many, not all, but many of these English colonists bring with them a sincere devotion to the scriptures and to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they leave in the foundational periods of our nation's forming a huge Christian thumbprint on the formative years of our development, one that still affects us in many ways for the better to this day. And so the Reformation, as I said, it gains traction here, it gains opposition there, but with the Reformation comes a counter-Reformation, because the Roman Catholic Church is seeing a lot of ground being lost, a lot of former Catholics going off into this Protestant cause. And so the Counter-Reformation begins, and that means, among other things, the founding of the Jesuit order with the express purpose of winning back regions and places and people that have been won over to the Protestant cause. And for a time, a degree of tension between Catholic and Protestant that's hard for us to understand today, but it is probably similar to the suspicion with which Muslims would have been regarded after the 9/11 attacks, which for many Muslims was very, very unfair. But that was similar to the suspicion and the antagonism that Protestants and Catholics once had towards one another during this era. So a lot of history stems from this, and a lot of conflict stems from it, but there's a lot of good that comes out of this era as well. Like with all historical events, it's always a mixed bag, always some good, always some bad, but in this case, much good and much blessing and benefit to those of us who call ourselves after Christ in our day. Catch you later.